ENVX in less than 5 minutes. Please stand by. Hello and welcome. This is the live office hour for ENVX, and we'll be starting in about 2 minutes. Please stand by.
Hi, and welcome to our third and final live office hour for ENVX. I'm Mike Goudzwaard.
I'm Andy Friedland, instructor for the course.
And we're looking forward to hearing from you today. We have some questions that we'll take from you. And last time we noticed there were a lot of questions that came in towards the end of our live office hour. So if you have questions, just put them in now and we'll get to them in a few minutes. There are two ways that you can do that. One is using the Q&A tool in Google Hangouts. That's probably the easiest way. Or you can use the discussion forum live office hour in the edX platform. So either one of those will get to us. And with that, let's go to our first comment from someone talking about going off the grid. Portable. I live in a trailer nearly 12.2 meters in length and 2.4 meters in width. My family and I are interested in going off grid. Our goal is to find a portable alternative energy source. Solar and wind power are both options, but which would be better in the long run? Is this even a realistic goal for people whose lives are mobile?
This is a great question, and there's a lot of pieces to it. So I'll approach two of them. The first one is, what's the most realistic and practical kind of renewable energy for someone to own who's a homeowner, and in this case, a mobile homeowner? And I would say that of the two choices, solar is the way to go. So solar PV panels on the roof of the trailer, or maybe on some kind of fixed stand that can be put out when the trailer is not in motion. Those would be some things to think about. But if you're off grid, not only do you need to generate electricity, but you need to store it. So that involves batteries. And that increases the environmental footprint of your whole energy system. And it also adds to weight, which you're moving around. So I'd say it's going to be a little bit tricky. Another possibility would be to have solar generation capacity and understand that you're going to have limited storage and you're going to mostly use solar PV when the sun is shining. I don't know if that's practical in your application. But one thing I'd like to say is that wind has an absolute important role in the portfolio for a municipality, for a country, for a city. But for individual homeowners, wind has more mechanical moving parts, and therefore it sometimes has the potential financial liability of more service. Whereas PV panels, if you buy them and you take care of them, you really have, let's say, limited maintenance on them, and that's important to consider. Thanks for the question.
So our next question is about a resource, water, which we have quite a bit of here in the Northeast United States, but I grew up in the Southwestern United States where water is quite a commodity and has to be more carefully used. And my dad ran a small water system. So this question is about California. I came across a US study that stated that California's water management plan was originally planned to have rivers and groundwater from Northern California sustain the water needs of Southern California. What are the predicted consequences due to the growth of California's population size when a large portion of the state is in a desert environment? And I've seen one of those aquifers that runs from Northern California down to Southern California. It's quite massive.
Yeah, this is, as Mike points out, here in the Northeast, we are not water limited. And so I'm probably not the best person to answer this question. So Mike, start correcting me if you disagree. But I'd say that sustainability of human populations is very closely tied to the availability of water in that location. So we look at Southern California and large cities. We look at, in the United States, Las Vegas, Nevada, large numbers of people in locations where there's not a lot of water. The other thing is that when people live there, they tend to want to, or society encourages them to have green lawns and fountains, let's say in Las Vegas, and that makes absolutely no sense in a location that is water limited. So we can certainly do better as individuals and as municipalities in conserving water, but you have to ask yourself, how practical, how sustainable is it to have lawns, for example, or other vegetation that requires a lot of irrigation in a water limited environment? And those are really important things to be talking about and considering.
Great. Now we move to another region of the globe, the Arctic, and there's a question about what do you think could be the impacts of Shell oil digging for oil in the Arctic? If Shell does find major oil reserves in the Arctic, what would be the impact? What would the impact of that be? And would that dwarf all our efforts to prevent use of fossil fuels?
So this question is highlighting the fact that just recently Shell Oil announced that they would be drilling and they were given permission to drill. An important topic that really is not within the realm of this course is what are the political dimensions? Who owns the area or who owns underneath the Arctic, and which countries of the various Arctic nations have rights? And that's something that we won't address at all. But remember that if we're talking about climate protection, if we're talking about reducing carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere, one important concept is to keep as much fossil fuel underground. Don't bring it up to the surface in production, and don't burn it and release CO2 to the atmosphere. So absolutely, this effort, if it went through, would increase the availability of fossil fuels and presumably would lead to more CO2 going into the atmosphere. Will that dwarf all our efforts to prevent the use of fossil fuels? I don't know about that, but it's absolutely a new component that we have to talk about, we have to consider. Many people like to say that at this point in time, we shouldn't be exploiting new sources of fossil fuels because we know that whether or not we're going to run out at any time in the near future, and I think it's unlikely that we will run out anytime soon. The idea is, can we step to the next technologies? Can we be doing more with renewables? Can we be doing more with non-depletable renewables like solar and wind? So those are important questions to ask, and the impact of drilling in the Arctic could be significant.
So here's a question about, or I guess a comment about biodiesel. And it says, I live in Guatemala and have produced biodiesel since 2006 from oils and fats from restaurants and industry. We are solving a problem that many people do not see, which is the disposal of oil and grease. Typically in Guatemala, most of these used to go straight into the river or burned in open fields. And I know this person was really interested in the interview with Sarah Alexander, a Dartmouth grad who talked about the waste oil project in India. And so it's great to see another example of this somewhere else in the world. And it sounds like a good project.
Yeah, it really does. So absolutely solving the problem, that disposal of waste oil and grease. And that is a real problem if it contaminates waterways, if it contaminates soil. So it's one of those best solutions where you have a waste product, and there are people who say that only human beings create waste products. In nature, nothing is a waste product. Elephant dung in nature is a resource for dung beetles. So here in the human beings are creating waste in oil and grease, and someone else is coming up with a use for it. And so that's excellent. And if you can, as this questioner brings up, or Sarah Alexander brings up, if you can use that as an energy source, particularly if you can displace a fossil fuel like coal or oil or natural gas, that's like a double benefit. So you're getting rid of or coming up with a use for a waste product, and you're decreasing or eliminating the need for a fossil fuel. So that's like almost a win-win situation.
And so we have another post from Mexico. It's called 100% geothermal. And this was kind of a shocking image to me. I hadn't seen this aerial photo. The post says, I live in Mexicali, Baja California, Mexico, right at the San Andreas Fault. 100% of our electricity is renewable as it comes from the third or fourth largest geothermal plant in the world. And then someone asks in response, what are the environmental and social impacts or benefits of the site mentioned above? And then the original poster said that there's sulfur released into the air as a result of this process. And we had been talking earlier about whether that sulfur would be released anyway, even without those geothermal plants. But geothermal is not something we talk a lot about in the course, but is certainly a renewable source of energy.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So first of all, not everybody is lucky enough to live near a geothermal source. So the idea is you can obtain heat, you can sometimes even obtain steam to generate electricity if you live close to a hot spring or some kind of geothermal natural source of energy. So there are all kinds of minerals that are off-gassed or released into the atmosphere from geothermal hot springs. And those would be released whether or not people are trying to harvest the energy from that plant or not. Although human activity and building a electricity generation plant might lead to more release of sulfur and other compounds into the air. So that's part of this situation. But it is a renewable energy. It's a carbon-free, non-fossil fuel way to generate heat or to generate electricity. So that's highly advantageous. Social impacts really touch upon any time you take a natural area, whether it be a river or the coastal ocean landscape or a hot spring or geothermal location, and you put an infrastructure there. You put something that's going to allow a turbine to be there and electrical generation and transmission wires. Absolutely, there are social impacts, and it might be affecting the people that live nearby. It might be affecting the views from people who live farther away. Those are all things that are part of the factor that need to be factored in. And I guess the benefit is that it's electricity that's renewable and it's carbon free. And those are important weighting factors, but absolutely there are things on the other side as well.
It's great to see those examples from around the world. And people also shared some graphs about their energy mix. So maybe we'll take a look at some of those. And I just want to remind you, if you're tuning in live, that you can ask questions and we'll get to them. There's a short delay, but within a couple of minutes, we can take your questions. So use that Q&A tool on the Google Hangouts. So we have one from Michigan, and from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, but I think this is for the whole state, electricity generation profile. And we see a big red slice of coal there. And we had talked earlier about that, I don't know if you can read it on the screen, but spending as a percentage of the total calendar year. So it's interesting that they used a dollar figure to come up with this graph rather than a kilowatt per hour or something like that.
Yeah. So that's very interesting. Remember that in any given country or any given location, some of the energy that is used to generate electricity. So in the United States, about 40% of our energy is used to generate electricity. So in this generation profile for the state of Michigan, we're seeing that something on the order of 66% of the electricity is being generated by coal. The fuel to generate 66% of the electricity is coal. And then you can see nuclear is the next largest at 22%. And that is fairly similar for the central part of the United States. The Midwest and central states have a large percentage of coal in their energy profile. But as Mike just mentioned, it's important to bring up that there are ways you can show. You can look at generation capacity, that is, how many megawatts of capacity in a given state or region come from a particular fuel. You can also look at the quantity of energy, or in this case, electricity, that's generated in a year and draw a pie diagram from that. So there are slightly different ways that'll give you slightly different pictures, but they basically represent the same idea that in Michigan, a large fraction of the electricity is coming from coal.
Then look at this one from Australia. It's so we have electricity generation from across Australia, and someone says, I live in Australia. I found this graph that shows that renewable energy makes up 14% of the country's electricity mix. Again, a large portion of that is coal.
Yeah, so in this case, looking at, presumably this is for all of Australia, there's a large fraction of coal responsible for generating electricity. And renewables, someone else wrote in one of the comments, isn't it a shame with all that sunshine in Australia that there isn't more PV, there isn't more photovoltaic solar generation? And I think a lot of countries can be faulted for perhaps not transitioning fast enough, but we need to remember that there's energy involved in manufacturing PV panels, and there's waste generated when you manufacture panels, there's expenses, and there's an infrastructure, and you have to transfer over, and you have to start abandoning existing generation plants and coming up with renewable generation plants. And there are a lot of challenges. You have to have an effective grid to transfer the electricity from where you're generating it to where the users are. And that might be different when you're using wind or solar than if you have a coal burning power plant or a natural gas power plant. So there's a lot of challenges, but it's great to see these different profiles, these electricity generation profiles from around the world.
Yeah, and there's a movement to solarize our community around here called Solarize the Upper Valley, so the Upper Connecticut River Valley. And that wasn't as popular a few years ago, but I think people noted that Germany has been doing this much longer than we have, and we actually have more sunshine on an annual basis than most of Germany.
That's right. People have pointed out that Germany isn't the sunniest place in the world, and yet they have a large number of PV panels installed in the country. And a lot of this has been happening because the prices have come down for PV panels.
So there's another graph from Ireland, and this takes a different view looking at just renewable energy. And it's a graph from 2012 showing 19.6% of total electricity generated was from renewable energy sources. And we see of that, a major component was wind.
Right, so it's important with this diagram to remember that this is blowing up the roughly 20% that is renewable energy sources for electricity and making that the whole pie, or the whole donut in this case. So it shows that of the renewable energy sources, wind is the largest fraction, and then hydro is next. Landfill is one that people often find interesting, and that's referring to methane gas, which occurs in anaerobic decomposition in landfills, and that is harnessed and collected and is then used to generate electricity, just like natural gas is used to generate electricity. So that's an interesting one to see. And it's great to just get these posts from different parts of the world and see what the fuel mix is in these different parts of the world.
You know, there's some posts that people just love to go back to and keep commenting on, and this has been a popular one from the first week of the course, an environmental problem, parrots in Madrid, and I think there's 30 or 40.
I think
replies.
there's
50 now.
Yeah. Yep.
So
this is great, and this is something that you could argue we didn't highlight enough in the course, and that's the idea of introduced species. We talked about that in the first week, and we talk about it a little bit in the last week. But here people just love these pictures of species that accidentally are released in other locations, and then you've got parrots in Madrid. And so that one picture, which was posted very early in the course, has just had people going back to it. And I do believe that the number of posts on this one, the number of additional posts to this thread is 50 or 55 somewhere. And that's our highest one. I think that's the most popular thread in the course. So thanks for posting that and contributing to it.
So should we talk about recycling?
Yes.
I mean, people
absolutely.
ask us, here's a course about environmental science, and you don't say anything about recycling, and that's often one of the first things people think about. And there's a number of posts. Here's one, recycling waste, reducing landfills. So this person's from the seacoast of Connecticut. Stanford moved to a single stream recycling in 2009 with the goal of making recycling more efficient and easier for citizens. The goal was to reduce 40% of all the city waste, although I haven't been able to find any statistics about how successful it has been. In my house, I would estimate that over 60% of our waste goes into the recycling bin, with another 10% going into the compost bin. I hope that the recyclable material that is collected is actually being reused rather than winding up in the landfill.
Okay, so this question brings up a lot of interesting points. So first of all, in the developed world, there was a period of time 10 and 20 years ago, maybe 30 years ago, where people started many streams of recycling. So when you had your materials that you could recycle, you had to sort them into green glass in one bin and clear glass in another bin. and glossy paper in a different bin, and white paper in yet another bin, and cardboard in another bin. And a few years ago, in this case in Stamford, Connecticut, it was in 2009, a number of municipalities and a number of recycling companies started moving to what's often called single stream recycling or no sort recycling. And the idea is you just put everything in one bin if it is recyclable, and a company will then sort it, and they'll be able to respond to markets. So if in a particular month or a particular year there's a demand for clear glass versus green glass, they can sort clear versus green. In another year, maybe all of that glass is being ground up and used for the base of the foundation of a road or highway. It doesn't matter what color it is, and then they won't sort it by color. So there's a lot of arguments that it will be more financially lucrative, and also that it'll be easier for the individual or the homeowner or the small business. And for those reasons, it was thought that recycling rates would go up. The United States has had traditionally about a 33% recycling rate for municipal solid waste, what homeowners and small businesses throw out. There are countries in the world, Japan, I believe, is in the 50 to 60% recycled of everything that could potentially get thrown out. So there are countries that do a lot better, but the United States in general has seen an increase by going to the no sort or single stream recycling. And we need to point out that recycling wasn't called recycling in this country and in many countries today. A long time ago, people just reused things, and that became out of fashion after World War II, and when people were looking for convenience, and more things got thrown away. And so it's really important to point out that we're going back now to something that was done a long time ago, and nobody made a big deal about it, nobody talked a lot about it, it just happened. I suppose it's better to make sure that you recycle materials, but remember also there's that mantra, that saying that it's best to reduce your generation of waste. If you can't reduce, then reuse something. Take a white piece of paper that is only written on one side and write on the other side. And finally, if you can't, or you've done that already, then recycle. Also, people talk a lot about composting. But there's another question. That's the next slide, I believe, Mike, and we should look at that one because that's part of this discussion as well.
Sure, yeah. So we go to India, solid waste disposal in India. And in India, there's millions of tons of solid waste, both organic and inorganic, generated each year. But all of it is put together and dumped in dumping sites outside major cities. And this is a major problem. It is causing environmental and health problems. Additionally, methane is generated at these sites, which is a major greenhouse gas and a major contributor to global warming, as we have seen in the lectures. In fact, this gas can be collected at landfill sites and used for heating and electricity generation. This is in stark contrast to the US, where trash is separated from materials that can be recycled, as we just discussed. This is a big problem in India, and I'm sure in other developing countries.
Yeah, so I would say absolutely. Thanks for making this distinction between the developed world problems related to trash and municipal solid waste and the problems that you see in the developing countries. So without a doubt, there are trash piles on street corners in the developing world, and people just dump their trash nearby, and other people pick through it and in a sense are doing some recycling, but are also maybe exposed to harmful materials in the process. And then there are larger landfills outside of cities. I've seen photographs of people that go through these larger landfills and burn the organic materials so that the metals are more easily obtainable, more easy to find, and they get better money for the scrap metal. So you can see landfills on fire, which causes an air pollution problem downwind of the location, and it's absolutely a harmful practice for the people in the landfill that are sorting through the materials. There's anytime you have organic matter, so whether that's in the developing world or the developed world, large amounts of organic matter in an anaerobic environment, an environment where there's not a lot of air and there's not a lot of mixing, you're going to get methane. You're going to get that very potent greenhouse gas, methane, CH4, being produced. And in some cases, companies will harvest that methane and generate electricity from it, but in many cases it might just release and diffuse to the atmosphere, where it contributes to global warming. So there's all kinds of things that can be talked about with this subject. And I agree, this is a big problem in India and in many other developing countries, absolutely.
Great. Here's one about restoring a copper mine site. And what are the most important procedures in restoration of an abandoned copper mine site? What initial steps must be taken?
That's a great question and a tough question. So nothing in this course really prepares anyone, I don't believe, for reclaiming an abandoned mining site, which I presume this is what we're looking at here. And so there's a lot of things that need to be done. And in the United States, an abandoned copper mine site might be declared a Superfund site, and then it's handled by the Environmental Protection Agency. And in other countries around the world, there are similar agencies that handle this kind of issue specifically. But there's a couple of important things. One thing is to try to minimize the amount of water that flows through the copper tailings, the material that didn't contain enough copper to be lucrative financially, but it's enough copper and associated compounds, like a lot of copper sulfides are common in copper mines, and now you've got acid mine drainage from water trickling through, taking some of that sulfur and also taking some of the copper and contaminating nearby waterways. So one issue would be to reduce the amount of water coming in. One possible way to do that is cover the site and perhaps put something on it, above it, that would divert water around the site. Another thing is to make sure that dust isn't stirred up from that site. So you probably don't want to allow lots of foot or vehicle traffic. You want to do things like vegetate it so there's not a lot of erosion and wind-blown sediments that contain copper, probably other metals associated with the copper mine. So I hope those would give you an idea of the kinds of things. Unfortunately, it's generally expensive, and it should be done properly to prevent additional environmental contamination. So those might be some of the initial steps. And if you're interested in looking more about this, it's generally called reclamation. So it would be reclamation of an abandoned mining site would be a way, if you were going to use a search engine, you could read lots about this and get different kinds of techniques and avenues of discussion about it.
Great question. So students seem to really enjoy the field trips in the videos as a part of Introduction to Environmental Science. And when we were building the course, we talked about where we might visit, and we said, why not go around our community and see the natural environment around us? And one of the really popular visits was to the Dartmouth power plant. And someone asks about comparing the Dartmouth power plant to electricity generating power plant that uses natural gas, and what might be some advantages or disadvantages of using a different fuel source other than, you know, number 6 fuel oil that the Dartmouth power plant uses.
Yeah, that's an important thing to talk about. So remember that the Dartmouth power plant generates steam with number 6 oil and then co-generates electricity with that steam before it's sent out to buildings to heat the spaces and heat water. So that's cogeneration. And there's also with natural gas, which is not a fuel that's readily available to us in northern New England, where we are in the state of New Hampshire. But with natural gas, because when you burn the natural gas, the byproduct, the waste product that would typically go out the smokestack is relatively clean. Remember we said that CH4 methane, natural gas, is a really clean fuel to burn. There's not a lot of corrosive metals. There's not a lot of sulfur dioxide. There's not a lot of particulates. So you can actually take that waste stream and turn another turbine with the waste stream. And that's what's called a combined cycle, because you're combining the steam cycle with the waste heat cycle and generating and pushing 2 turbines for the price of 1, if you will, or for the energy coming from 1. So that allows combined cycle natural gas plants to be 50 to 60% efficient, whereas a typical coal burning power plant might only be 33 or 34% efficient. So that is a highly optimal way to use natural gas if it's accessible to you. In the case of Dartmouth, we don't have that accessible to us. There's no natural gas pipeline nearby. And Dartmouth is exploring the feasibility of trucking gas. This would be liquefied natural gas to someplace nearby campus. But I don't know if that ultimately will be deemed a wise choice to follow. But it is something that Dartmouth is considering. Thanks.
So a number of people have finished the course. I think we're around 300 of you have earned a certificate or verified certificate, and many people have asked, when do I get that certificate? They're really excited to get that. So a couple of dates I want to remind students about. July 15th is the last day that you can upgrade to the verified certificate. So if that's important to you and you want to pay some money and get the ID verified, July 15th is the last day to do that. July 17th is a week from today, is the last day to do any work in the course for a certificate. So the course will still be open. You'll still be able to see materials, read past discussion posts. You won't be able to post new things in the discussion board or complete new work for a certificate at that point. So you have 1 week. So some of you are really close, so I encourage you to buckle down this next week and go for the certificate. Then the certificates are issued by edX, and those are all done in one batch, and those will be issued by July 30th. And we'll send an email as a reminder when those are available. So you can get those in the edX dashboard right next to the listing of the course. You just click that and download it, and you can print it if you like.
That's right. So the idea is it won't be emailed to you. You have to go get it and download it as a PDF from the edX site.
But we're excited that people are looking for those certificates.
Yeah,
so,
yeah, absolutely.
They'll be there
We
soon.
both have signed them, Mike and I, so you'll like, and we hope you'll put in the work, the hard work, and earn that certificate, because we'd really like to see you do that, and we want to see the most number of people possible successfully complete the course.
Right. And some people have asked, is there a follow-up to this course? We don't have one planned at this point, but as other people have pointed out, there are courses on edX that relate to special topics in this course. So if you're interested in digging deeper, you can always look there.
Absolutely, yeah.
And Andy, I see you brought a book along.
I did, yeah. So in case you're looking to follow up this course, and one of the things that I think we had to make some choices. We didn't talk about recycling hardly at all. And I'm glad we were able to talk about it during the office hour today. One of the things that probably we spent less time and energy on is species diversity and global extinctions. And so I want to bring up a book that we've already mentioned in the course. This is The Sixth Extinction by Elizabeth Colbert. And what is really nice about this book is that it talks about the 5 extinctions that have occurred over geologic time, and it explores the hypothesis that we are now looking at a 6th extinction, that this is the 6th and perhaps the largest extinction that that will occur over geologic time. So the book rather, is written as a series of chapters. Many of those chapters were articles that appeared in a journal, a magazine in the United States called The New Yorker, and you can look at that, and many of those are available as PDFs online, so you don't even have to buy the book, although I'd recommend buying the book because it's a nice collection of these stories and it's definitely worth thinking about. We want to thank all of you, Mike and I want to thank all of you for all the contributions you've made to the course and all the interesting posts and discussions that we've gotten into. And if you're still working, we encourage you to keep it up, earn the credits that you need, and hopefully you'll successfully pass the course. So as Mike mentioned, there's a whole nother week that you can continue to work on this course before the course closes on the 17th, right?
Yeah.
And then we do have one more slide, and I guess Mike's going to do it because we want to thank a number of people that helped us during the course and helped us during these live office hours.
Yeah, so we had some people that you don't see behind the camera helping with this live office hour. The Jones Media Center, where we're in this wonderful space in the Dartmouth Library. Sawyer Broadley on camera, Chloe Maddle and Joby Bernstein, our TAs, and Adam Nemiroff, who was switching the video for us. So thank you to all of them and everybody else who made this course possible. There's a long list in the syllabus of everybody who helped and gave us ideas and their time. So, so keep up the good work, and we'll see you in the discussion boards.
Thank you.